Imagine this. It's a beautiful spring Sunday morning in April 1945 in the picturesque German city of Weimar, the cradle of German culture, home to Goethe, Schiller, and the elegant cafes where the elite once sipped coffee under chestnut trees. Well-dressed men in tailored suits and fedoras stroll arm in arm with women in fur coats, lipstick bright, high heels clicking on the cobblestones. They're chatting lightly, enjoying the sunshine after a long winter of war. Suddenly, American jeeps screech to a halt. Grim-faced GIs with rifles jump out and start rounding people up. Not just anyone, but the richest, most prominent citizens. Bankers, professors, doctors, factory owners, politicians' wives. About 1,000 in total. Confusion turns protest, then fear as bayonets prod them into columns. These people are marched out of town, up a steep hill called Ettersburg, just 5 miles away. At the top waits something they swore they knew nothing about, a place whose smoke has drifted over their city for 8 years. Buchenwald Concentration Camp. The man who ordered this forced confrontation? General George S. Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army. He wasn't content with liberating the camp and moving on. He wanted the locals who lived in luxury nearby to see the hell on their doorstep with their own eyes and confront the lie that they knew nothing. Stick with me, because this story isn't just about one general's bold decision. It's about the fragile bubble of denial that let ordinary people ignore unimaginable evil right next door. It's about shattered illusions, raw human reactions, and a lesson Patton forced on a city that thought it could look away forever. Weimar wasn't some remote village. It was Germany's cultural jewel, the city of poets and philosophers, where the Bauhaus movement was born, where orchestras played Beethoven in grand halls, where parks bloomed with flowers and children attended elite schools. In the 1930s and 40s, it remained a haven of refinement, fine boutiques, theaters, libraries, all thriving even as the war raged. But just up the hill, hidden in the woods, was Buchenwald, established in 1937, one of the first major concentration camps on German soil. Over 8 years, tens of thousands passed through its gates, political prisoners, Jews, Roma, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, Soviet POWs. The SS ran it with brutal efficiency, and the people of Weimar, they couldn't claim ignorance. The camp was built with local labor. Prisoners marched through town to work sites. SS officers lived in Weimar suburbs, shopped in the same markets, sent their kids to the same schools. Their wives bought groceries next to the wives of prominent citizens. On windy days, the smoke from the crematorium chimneys drifted down into the city, thick, acrid, unmistakable. Ashes sometimes fell like gray snow. Yet when questioned later, almost to a person, they insisted, "We knew nothing." The smoke? From factories. The skinny men in striped uniforms? Volunteer workers. The trains rolling and packed with people? Resettlement programs. It became a mantra. We're Haben nix Jewist. By early April 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing. On April 11th, advanced units of Patton's Third Army reached Buchenwald. The SS guards fled in panic. The prisoners, about 20,000 still alive, rose up and took control of the camp themselves, hanging a sign, "We are free." American troops entered the scenes beyond comprehension. Emaciated survivors, many weighing less than 70 pounds, some children who had forgotten how to play or smile. Piles of bodies stacked like cordwood outside the crematorium. A zoo the SS had built for their family's amusement, complete with bears and monkeys, while prisoners starved yards away. Patton arrived a few days later for a personal inspection. He was a hard man, famous for slapping shell-shocked soldiers, driving his men relentlessly. But Buchenwald hit him differently. Walking through the camp, seeing the oven still warm, the pathology lab with its horrors, he turned green. Later, in his diary, he wrote, "I have never felt so sick in my life. This is not war. This is madness." He demanded to speak with the local military governor or camp officials. When told the nearby civilians claimed no knowledge, Patton exploded. "They are lying," he said flatly, "and I am going to prove it." He gave orders. Round up the elite of Weimar, the ones who lived best under the regime. No random people. The bankers who financed it. The professors who taught Nazi ideology. the doctors who performed experiments, the businessmen who profited from slave labor, and their families, the women in fur coats who attended concerts while prisoners screamed. On April 16th, it happened. American soldiers went door to door in the finest neighborhoods. "You are coming with us." No explanations at first. The chosen ones, about 1,000, were assembled in the town square, still dressed in their Sunday best. Then the march began. 2 hours up the winding road to Edwardsburg Hill. At first, some protested or joked nervously, but as they climbed, the wind shifted. That smell hit them, rotting flesh, burning bone, something sweeter and sickening underneath. Faces changed. Smiles faded. At the top, they passed through the infamous wrought iron gate with its cynical inscription, "Jedem da Sane, to each his own." What they saw next broke them. First, the prisoners, ghosts in striped rags, staring silently from behind barbed wire. Eyes hollow, skin stretched over bones, some too weak to stand. Then the sights the Americans forced them to see up close. A trailer loaded with naked corpses, limbs tangled, waiting for the ovens. The crematorium itself. Ovens still containing partial remains. The pathology block was worst. On a long table, displayed like medical specimens, shrunken heads from Polish prisoners, pieces of tattooed human skin, preserved and tanned, souvenirs made by Ilse Koch, the wife of the camp commandant, known as the Witch of Buchenwald. She had lampshades and book covers crafted from them. No gas masks for the visitors in the typhus wards, the stench of disease and death overwhelming. Women fainted. Men vomited. Some screamed. One moment stood out. A former prisoner, now free, pointed at a well-dressed banker in the group. "I remember you," he said quietly. "You came to inspect the factory where we worked. You saw me. You looked away." The banker had no response. Just silence. The tour lasted hours. No one rushed them. American soldiers stood guard, faces stone, making sure every horror was witnessed. When it ended, the civilians marched back down the hill in dead quiet. No chatting now. No protests. Just broken people. In the days that followed, several committed suicide, unable to live with what they'd seen, or perhaps with the guilt of what they'd ignored. Patton wasn't done. He reported up the chain, and General Eisenhower took it further. Ike visited camps himself and ordered journalists, congressmen, even British MPs brought in to document everything. He said, "I made the visit deliberately to give first-hand evidence if ever there develops a tendency to charge these allegations merely to propaganda." When told about the suicides in Weimar, Patton reportedly shrugged. Good. Maybe the rest of them will learn. The reactions inside Buchenwald that day were something the American soldiers would never forget. These weren't hardened SS men or fanatical Nazis being confronted. These were the good Germans, the cultured ones, the ones who read Goethe and listened to Bach while the world burned just up the hill. A middle-aged woman in an expensive wool coat, pearls still around her neck, took one look at the stack of corpses and collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Not from pity, she kept repeating, "My God, what have they done to us?" As if the horror was something done to her, not by her own nation. A university professor, distinguished gray hair, glasses perched on his nose, stood frozen in front of the display of tattooed skin. When a GI asked if he had any comment, he whispered, "This cannot be real." Then he turned away and vomited into the dirt. One of the younger women, maybe in her 30s, stylish hat, now askew, approached the skeletal prisoner who was watching the group silently. She tried to speak, something apologetic, but the man just stared through her with eyes that had seen too much. He finally said in broken German, "You smelled it, every day. You smelled us burning." She had no answer. Her face crumpled, and she had to be supported by soldiers as her legs gave out. The mayor of Weimar himself was in the group, forced to walk the same path. When shown the lampshades made from human skin, he reportedly went pale as death and said nothing for the rest of the tour. Later accounts say he hanged himself within days. Not everyone broke immediately. Some tried to maintain dignity, to pretend this was all Allied propaganda. A factory owner muttered that the bodies were probably typhus victims, and that the Americans had staged everything. A soldier overheard him and grabbed the man by the collar, dragging him closer to a pile of emaciated corpses. "Feel that," he snarled. "Does that feel staged to you?" The man went silent after that. The worst moment came in the children's barracks. Hundreds of young boys, Jewish, Polish, Roma, had been used for medical experiments. Some were still alive, barely, covered in scars from injections and surgeries without anesthesia. When the Weimar women saw them, several began screaming hysterically. One mother in the group clutched at a GI, begging to take one of the children home with her, as if that could erase years of indifference. The Americans didn't allow any shortcuts. Every visitor had to walk through every horror. The little camp where typhus raged unchecked. The quarry where prisoners were worked to death carrying stones up endless steps. The gallows where public hangings had entertained SS families on weekends. The bear pit, the actual zoo the commandant built for his children's birthday parties, right next to the crematorium. By the time the tour ended, the transformation was complete. The elegant Sunday strollers who had marched up the hill confident in their innocence came down as hollow shells. No one spoke. No one looked at each other. The smell clung to their clothes, their hair, their skin. Some would never get it out of their noses. Survivors said. Back in Weimar, the impact spread quickly. The suicide started almost immediately. A prominent doctor, a city councilman, several wives who couldn't face what they'd seen. Others fell into deep depression or alcoholism. The mantra of "we knew nothing" died that day. It was impossible to say anymore, not honestly. Patton didn't stop with one visit. He ordered more. Over the following weeks, thousands more Germans from Weimar and surrounding towns were marched through Buchenwald and nearby Ohrdruf, which Eisenhower himself visited. American newsreel cameras captured it all, civilians being forced to bury bodies, to touch the evidence, to confront what their silence had allowed. One famous sequence shows a burly German man in a suit, clearly prosperous, being made to lift a corpse onto a burial cart. His face is contorted in disgust and horror. The narrator's voiceover. This man lived 3 miles away. He said he never knew. Eisenhower understood the importance of what Patton started. He issued orders that every American unit near a camp should bring local civilians through. "Make them see," he wrote. "Make them remember." He invited journalists, photographers, even members of Congress to document everything before the evidence could be denied. British and French authorities did similar things in their zones. At Bergen-Belsen, the local population was forced to bury thousands of bodies with their bare hands. Guards from the town were made to live in the camp for weeks, sleeping in the same conditions the prisoners had endured. But Patton's action at Weimar stands out because of the contrast, the height of German culture forced to confront the depth of its depravity. The city that produced the Weimar Republic, that stood for enlightenment and democracy before Hitler, now had to face what it had become under him. The psychological impact lasted generations. Children in Weimar schools were later taken on mandatory visits to the camp memorial. Survivors came to speak. The phrase "we knew nothing" became a national shame, a warning against willful blindness. Patton himself didn't live to see the full reckoning. He died in a car accident just months later. But his decision that day in April 1945 helped ensure that the world would never forget. By forcing those who benefited most from the regime to see its ultimate expression, he stripped away the last excuse. Some historians argue it was too harsh, traumatizing civilians who were already defeated. Others say it was necessary justice, a small taste of the suffering millions endured. Whatever your view, it worked. Holocaust denial never took serious root in Germany the way it did elsewhere, partly because so many ordinary Germans were made to see the truth with their own eyes. The smoke that drifted over Weimar for 8 years finally cleared. But for those who marched up Ettersberg Hill that spring day, the memory never did. They had lived in paradise while hell burned next door. Patton made sure they could never pretend otherwise again. In the decades that followed, Buchenwald became more than a site of horror. It became a classroom for a nation that had to learn the hardest lesson imaginable. Silence in the face of evil is complicity. The forced tours didn't end with Patton's Third Army. As more camps were liberated, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, Auschwitz, Mauthausen. The Allies made it policy. Local mayors, police chiefs, teachers, priests, anyone in a position of influence, was marched through the gates. In some towns, every adult was required to participate. Bodies were buried by German hands. Survivors spoke directly to the crowds. The message was unmistakable. You could not say you did not know. Not anymore. Eisenhower's foresight proved crucial. He understood that victory on the battlefield wasn't enough. The world had to see the evidence before the sites could be cleaned up, before denial could take root. He ordered miles of film shot, thousands of photographs taken. American Signal Corps cameramen captured everything. The living skeletons, the mass graves, the personal effects piled high, shoes, glasses, suitcases with names still painted on them. Those images went around the globe. In theaters back home, newsreels played to stunned audiences. Newspapers printed photos that made people turn away. Congressmen who toured the camps came back changed men, pushing for war crimes trials with renewed urgency. In Germany itself, the reckoning was slower but profound. The Weimar visits became part of the national memory. Survivors returned years later to speak in schools. The camp was preserved as a memorial. Today, visitors walk the same paths those civilians did in 1945, reading plaques that quote their reactions: the shock, the tears, the suicides. Patton's role in starting it all is often overshadowed by his battlefield fame, but many historians credit him with one of the war's most important psychological victories. By targeting not the SS fanatics but the comfortable middle class, the ones who enabled the regime through apathy, he struck at the root of how such evil could flourish in a civilized society. He didn't do it out of cruelty. He did it because he believed some truths were too important to be optional. In his words to his staff, "If we let these people go home and pretend this didn't happen, we'll be fighting the same war again in 20 years. He was right. Post-war Germany confronted its past more honestly than many occupied nations because the evidence was shoved in its face at gunpoint when denial was easiest. Though we knew nothing, excuse crumbled under the weight of what those 1,000 Weimar citizens witnessed on that April day. The survivors of Buchenwald watched the tours with mixed feelings. Some felt a grim satisfaction. Finally, the neighbors saw. Others pitied the civilians' breakdown, remembering their own first days in the camp when illusions died too. One survivor later wrote, "They cried for hours. We had cried for years." Patton's decision wasn't universally popular even among allies. Some British officers called it excessive. A few American chaplains worried about the spiritual damage to the forced visitors. But Eisenhower backed it completely, and history has largely vindicated them. Because in the end, remembering isn't enough. Confronting is what changes things. Weimar today is a quiet, beautiful city again. Museums, universities, parks blooming under the same chestnut trees. But up on Ettersburg Hill, the camp memorial stands as a permanent reminder. Every year, school groups visit. Every year, new generations learn what happened when good people chose comfort over courage. Patton's march forced a city and eventually a nation to look evil in the eye and admit, we let this happen. It's a brutal way to teach a lesson, but sometimes that's the only way it sticks. Thanks for coming with me on this one. It's heavy, but it's important. Stories like this remind us that the greatest dangers often aren't the monsters we can see, but the ones we choose not to. Never again starts with never looking away.